Good morning, Fieldstone 7th graders. This is Mr. Lent from the Rising Stars. Happy Monday, May 18th. I'm going to be walking you through today and tomorrow's lessons, where we are going to be doing a little bit of a wrap-up on sectionalism, which is the topic that you started last week, where you were taking a look at and analyzing aspects of the North and the South, their economic difference primarily. We're going to talk a little bit about social differences today and tomorrow as well. And your task for today will be to, one, listen to a short lecture of mine on the North, which I'm going to connect you to a Google slide in a moment. And then, as you can see from the screen here, you're going to be answering a series of multiple choice questions that deal with the different slides that today are going to be dealing with the North. And tomorrow we're going to be doing a lecture on the South and doing the same assessment. Okay, so at any point in time that you need to, once you are on this Google form, you can simply go back to this link, and that will bring you to the Google Slides presentation, and I'm going to walk you through that right now. Okay, so again, we're looking at the worlds of the North and the South, and as you can see from this first screen, okay, you have a clear difference between northern industry and southern agriculture. That is really the base, and then we'll expand from there. Okay, so I'm just going to read the first part of this today, and then the other part we'll talk about tomorrow. Between 1793 and 1850, the northern and southern parts of the United States became more and more different economically and socially. In the North, the Industrial Revolution took a stronger hold on the economy. Factories mass-produced goods at a pace unequaled in all of history. Furniture, guns, textiles, and shoes were now made by machines. Advancements in transportation and communication greatly improved the movement of goods, people, and ideas between the eastern markets and western farms. Cheap immigrant labor drove the workforce of the common factory in the North, and as a result, urbanization took place and new cities grew rapidly. Okay, so here we have a couple of images that really help to sum up what was going on with northern economy in the early to mid 1800s. As you can see in the picture on the left, okay, factories are really becoming the center of focus. Unfortunately, with the introduction of the steam engine, pollution is going to become a major issue, especially in the increasingly crowding cities. The pictures on the right just show you how advancements in transportation, communication, and agriculture were starting to progress in the North primarily. As you see in the top right picture, you've got your steam engines, okay, your steamboat and your locomotive, and we also have an advanced printing press and something I'll be talking about shortly, and that is the telegraph machine. At the bottom here we have is what is called a mechanical reaper. If I go to the next couple of screens, we'll talk about those in a little bit more detail. Okay, so some of the new machines that are coming out in the early to mid 1800s. First, we have the sewing machine. Okay, before, just like anything else, clothes were sewed by hand. It was time consuming. Clothes were expensive. Most families had to make their own clothing, and that was usually the mother and the daughter's primary job. Now, with the introduction of a hand-powered sewing machine, workers in factories can now sew several items of clothing in the time it took a tailor to just sew just one. This will greatly bring down the price of cloth, which will ultimately lead to the beginnings of shirts that are pre-made and clothing that is pre-made. And this will be the introduction of storefronts and people actually going to stores and buying their clothing, which is pretty much what we do today. Now, at the bottom here, you have what is called the mechanical reaper. Now, you might recognize that name, Reaper, from the Grim Reaper. That's the guy that wears the black cape and carries around a device called a sickle. That is the long stick with the curved blade. That is actually a farming tool, hence the name the Reaper. To reap means to gather. Okay, so here you have a mechanical reaper, which is a device that actually helps to harvest and gather grain. Before that, field hands had to cut all of that by hand with one of those sickles that you see with the Grim Reaper. Afterwards, you now have a device that's pulled by a horse that kind of works like a lawnmower. Okay, these blades turn, and as the horse pulls the device, the blades turn, cut the grain, and then it's laid out here where another farmer can start to rake it into piles and bales. Okay, the effect Farm workers now are either going to move to northern cities because the number of farm hands needed will decrease, or they will continue to move west to start their own farms. Now, in addition to a mechanical reaper, an advancement in the plow had been invented by a man named John Deere, and you might recognize that name. That's a pretty popular producer of everything from lawnmowers to farm equipment today. Okay. Then we have the telegraph. Okay. For those of you who like to text, this is really, in essence, the world's first text messaging machine. Before, just like anything else, things were slow, communication was slow, and you were really limited to letters, newspapers, pamphlets, and word of mouth, which could, in some cases, take days or weeks. Now you have the invention of a device where communication travels long distance via copper wire, just like a telephone would today. Okay, a landline, not our cell phones. We're not there just yet. But the most important thing about the telegraph is now that farmers and business could connect to each other much faster and much more efficiently, which means that the information could actually reach the destination before the product does. And a lot of times these telegraph lines were put up right along railroad lines, okay, because a lot of the increased transfer of goods and even people is going to happen on rail lines. So it just made sense to build the telegraph lines along those rail lines. Okay, so here's some of the products that are being produced in the north. Again, it is primarily agricultural. Okay, most people are still farmers, but you are seeing a shift from agriculture in the north to a more industrial type of economy. The New England states are still the dominant region for the textile industry. As you learned, in New England is where the textile industry will first form. But as time goes on and the steam engine takes hold, you could build factories anywhere, so that'll continue west. Okay? Cattle raising, lumber, growing grain, those are all still things that our early settlers had done that is being continued to do in the north. You also have the mining of iron ore and coal. Coal being fuel, iron and steel is what's going to help to build the rail lines and build the factories. Now, unlike any other time in history, this is really going to change or transform people's way of life. Most people, lived by the rising and the setting of the sun, didn't really venture more than a few miles from where they were born and grew up. And most people were agricultural or working on a farm. But now you have this shift to industry. Women, young children were some of the earliest mill or factory workers, primarily because they could be paid less than a man. Now, as time goes on and these factories become larger, the focus is going to be less on the well-being of the employee and more so on profit. Okay, so I have a little quote here. I regard people just as I regard my machinery, so long as they can do my work for what I choose to pay them. I keep them getting out of them all I can. Unfortunately, there was no worker protections at this time. There were no unions. There were no workers' rights. There was no health care. There was no overtime, no sick pay. So if you got hurt, you got sick, you couldn't work, you were fired, and there were plenty of people out on the street that could be picked up and put in your place quite easily because this was majorly unskilled labor, except for these guys here. These are what we call your artisans or your skilled technicians, your machinists. The machine breaks down, there's only a few people that know how to fix it. So these skilled laborers actually have something to bargain with regards to pay. They will be your first groups to form what are called trade unions or labor unions, and they will be the ones that will first invoke the power of the strike, where they will form in larger numbers to try and gain better pay from their employers. It won't be until the late 1800s and early 20th century that other labor groups will be able to start forming large trade and labor unions to force better pay and better working conditions. But at this time in the early mid-1800s, working in a factory was really no picnic. Okay? It was long hours. It was arduous, monotonous work. It was dangerous. It was loud. Okay? And unfortunately, things will get worse before they get better at this time. Now, fueling this labor boom is going to really be a wave of immigrants, primarily coming from Western Europe in the mid and late 1800s. They will make up the bulk of the workforce in your factories, the constructions of the canal that were running through the country. As you guys learned if you watched the video last Friday, the Erie Canal was predominantly built by hand by Irish immigrant labor. Factory work will be no different as well. Now, even like today, where the media and certain groups do look at immigrants as a threat, that same issue will take hold in the northern states as well. Okay, we have groups called nativists that resent these immigrants, and this leads to what we call discrimination against these groups. So even like today, where you see certain groups that are discriminated against, in the mid to late 1800s, it was the Irish. Later on, it will be the Italians. They were considered the threat, taking factory jobs for less pay, blamed for increased crime in the cities. And there was the religious differences, in this case where the Irish were mostly Roman Catholic and the majority of Americans at the time were Protestant. So you have these religious differences. They're being blamed for crime. They're being blamed for taking jobs. If anybody pays attention to the news, that can sound somewhat familiar, but it's just different groups that are being discriminated against today. So as you can tell, as you can understand now, discrimination is something that is not brand new. Hey, manufacturing, immigration, the need for factory work leads to what we call urbanization. New York City, as a result of the Erie Canal, will become the largest port city in the country, overtaking New Orleans. Population boom. Many of your immigrants are going to settle in these cities for the opportunity to find jobs. The Irish will come over in the mid-1840s primarily because of what's called a potato famine, where over 1 million people will die through extreme hunger. Germans will come over in the mid-1800s primarily trying to escape warfare. Now, these early cities, just like the early factories, were not the safest of places. You have overcrowding, which leads to pollution, which can lead to increased crime. Fires were pretty common because many of the structures were primarily built out of wood. But at the same time, the positives that you start to see are the beginnings of leisure time. Okay? Storefronts opening up, selling goods that are being mass produced in these factories, like clothing, shoes, furniture. And you also have the beginnings of entertainment, things like the circus, parks opening up, zoos, libraries, things that people can do on their spare time, and things that they can spend their money on with the increased pay that they're receiving from having steady work. And so here's a breakdown of the immigration going on in the mid-1800s. As I had mentioned, Ireland and Germany in particular are making up a large percentage of the overall immigrant boom in this portion of the 19th century. England and France will top out our top four, and then you have Scotland through the Scandinavian countries, Northern Europe, and eventually Southern and Eastern Europe. But in the 1800s, it was the Irish, the Germans, and the Brits that were making up our top three. Now, here's just a little breakdown of the Irish population in general. Notice again, as I mentioned, many of them are going to settle in the cities. Okay, your largest concentration in here, places like Boston, New York, upstate New York and Buffalo, New Jersey, okay, Pennsylvania, Illinois. Even today, these places have some of our largest Irish populations. And as a result of this influx of immigrants, as you can see from this map, some of your most populous states will be Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois. This in part was a result of the canal boom, the railroad boom. The massive wave of immigrants that are coming to the United States, again, are going to predominantly settle in the New England region or in the Great Lakes region. And as you can see from the red dots that represent the different states, the majority of urbanization is taking place in the north of that Mason-Dixon line here, which separates eventually what will be known as the free states and the slave states. Two of your largest cities in the country are actually right here in the 5 boroughs of New York. Manhattan was number 1. Brooklyn was the 3rd largest city at the time in 1860. Okay, so New York and Pennsylvania, Ohio round out the top 3 populous states. And you can even see here how industrialization and improvements in transportation are going to affect the size of cities. Here you have Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Albany, Schenectady, New York. These are all cities that are going to form on the Erie Canal. Okay? Same thing with things like Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago. all of these, Cincinnati, are all connected by canals and major rivers and bodies of water. Boston, number 5, as a result, again, of New England textiles. Okay, we'll do the Southern economy starting tomorrow. All right, so now at any point in time you need, you can go back to this slideshow. I'm just going to go back really quick to the assessment that you have. Okay, again, you're going to use the information from the slideshow that I just went through with you. This is a 10-point assignment. Again, anytime that you need to go back, here is the link. Okay, it's going to tell you which slides you need to use or slide for each of the questions. Be sure to read each question carefully. Okay, here we're asking for effects of new machines. Next question from slide 6, it's asking for the best claim to support the information from the map on that slide. Okay, what social scientist would use the information from the map on slide 6? Okay, which statement gives the best supporting evidence to this statement? Industrialization created new jobs for all types of people. Slides 8 and 9, which statement best states an effect of immigration to the U.S. in the mid-1800s? Slide 10, which statement best describes urbanization? Okay, slides 11 and 12, which claim best supports the information found on those slides? What conclusion can be made from slide 13? And then finally, you have your claim and evidence. Okay, here is your claim. Industrialization had a major impact on people in the North. You need to give 2 pieces of supporting evidence using any of the slides that were in the slideshow. Please make sure to write the slide number and your detail in a sentence or 2 that will support as evidence this claim. Industrialization had a major impact on people in the North. So maybe you want to talk about urbanization, or maybe you want to talk about immigration, or maybe you want to talk about the new machinery and how that affects people's lives, or even talk about factory life or something along those lines. You have plenty of options. You need to pick 2 supporting pieces of evidence. Please make sure to tell us the slide number where you got your information and give us detail from the slide itself. Okay, be as specific as possible. Again, if you have any questions, you can go back to the slideshow that I just presented to you. And once again, you can click on the link at the very top. That will take you to the slideshow, or you can simply rewatch this video and recording. Again, when you are done, don't forget to submit this Google form. Okay, and then I will see you or talk to you again tomorrow as we will go through and review life in the South. Have a great day.